We're going to talk about Joan Didion's article. There's some important stuff on it, so let's discuss it right now. Right now, get a notebook on writing. Right now. Anyway, here we go. Joan Didion wrote a lot about how she writes notes to herself and the different ways those notes end up having meaning to her as she gets older, which got me thinking. Her attitudes towards the experiences change. What about her memories? Let's talk about memories.
After high school, I was going to community college, and I found myself in between jobs, so I ended up going to a temporary service agency because I couldn't get anything else at the time. The economy was really bad at the time. One of the things I noticed was that any female who walked into the temp service agency tended to get sent to a clerical job, an office job, whereas any guy that walked into the place tended to get sent into warehouse work. I did a lot of warehouse work. I never got to wear a funky yellow vest like this, and I was never quite that happy, nor did I ever see anybody who was quite that happy. But there you go. I was used to working in warehouses. One time I got a job call. They wanted me to go to this dairy warehouse packaging plant, and I went there. I didn't think anything of it because I've been going to warehouses. In warehouses, you wear jeans and a t-shirt because anything you wear is going to get pretty much ruined. Warehouses are dirty, dusty places, as a rule. Well, I got there, and the guy, my boss for the day, looked at me and goes, "Didn't they tell you?" I'm like, "Tell me what?" It's like, "You're going to be working in the cooler today." Yeah. The thing is, I didn't have a jacket. It was Florida in June. Didn't even think about it. They were luckily able to find me a windbreaker which I could wear while I was working in there. It was, well, the average flannel shirt is a little bit thicker. I was really, really, really cold. I'd work for about 20 minutes until I lost feeling in my hands. Then I'd go pace around outside until I could regain feeling, and then I'd go back in the cooler and work more. But somehow, I guess through all this, they seemed to like me, so they called me back the next day. And I'm like, okay, I went, and I brought a jacket this time. They're like, "Oh, you're not going to be working in the cooler." I'm like, "Of course not. Why would I?" So, the things they had me do that day. Honest to God, they had me sweep the place like 4 or 5 times. I'd sweep, move some boxes, sweep the entire place again, move some more boxes, sweep the entire place again, so on and so forth. After my lunch break, they had me and another worker mow the grass in front of the building with the oldest lawnmower you'd ever seen in your life. It was just one step away from being the round push bladey thingy that doesn't have a motor. Then after we did that, they had me sweep the place again. Now, I made a few mistakes this day. One of the mistakes that I tended to make was I hated to be bored. So, when I didn't have anything to do, I would ask for something to do because it was better than sitting around and doing nothing. Or so I thought. Near the end of the day, I went to my boss and he goes, "Well, what do you want me to do now?" He's like, "Well, go around the perimeter of the yard. There's a big backyard and we got a fence there and we've had a problem with rats. So I want you to go around and check the rat traps. Here's a box of poison if they have somehow gotten the poison out and escaped. Here's a plastic bag if you run across any dead bodies." I know. You're thinking, gee, what a fun job. I made another mistake. I made a joke. Don't ever make a joke at work. I go, "So, well, what do I do if I find a live body?" And I swear to God, he turned around, went into a closet, came out with a broom handle with a nail on the end of it. Apparently, if I was to find a live rat, or one that hadn't quite succumbed to the poison yet, I was supposed to brain it with a nail on the end of a broom handle. Now, I tell you this story for a few reasons, but at this point in time, it's a story that I have told over and over and over again. This was when I was like 19 or 20 when this happened, and since I'm 138 now, it's quite a while ago, but it's a vivid instance for me. I mean, how can you forget being asked to brain animals with a nail? It seems kind of hard. I'm pretty convinced that that's how everything went, and I really didn't have to embellish anything. The problem was, one day I was listening to a podcast on an expert on memory, and he said that almost everybody's memory has faults. We misremember things. Our memories change as we get older, and I thought about this because I've been telling this story for years. I don't know if it's still true. So let's talk about how memory works. No, not that memory. No, not that memory. This kind of memory, remembering things. Didion talked about writing stuff down and not knowing the context, not remembering how it went, and then using the stuff however she ended up using it. Well, I'd like to put forth a supposition that it actually goes a step farther than that, because our memories themselves are very complex things that we end up having to deal with. Now, there are a lot of different types of memory, a lot of subcategories, but we're going to go through some of the major ones. And I got most of this from Psychology Today's website that goes over the basics of memory. There's a few different types. There's sensory memory. If we recall a sensory experience, what we just saw, what we just heard, what we have just tasted or something, we can recall about 3 seconds of it fairly easily. There's standard short-term memory. Short-term memory is that brief period of time you can remember something you were just exposed to. It can encompass anywhere from 30 seconds to a day. The thing about short-term memory is it doesn't stay with us forever, and we can only keep between 5 and 9 things in our short-term memory. Once our short-term memory gets full, we got a limited amount of slots. So if something else happens that we need to remember for any length of time, we have to knock something out of one of those slots. There's working memory. What working memory is the ability of our brains to keep a certain amount of information in our head available long enough to where we can do stuff with it. If you go to a restaurant and have to calculate a tip, then we have long-term memory. And long-term memory is the stuff we remember for long periods of time, memories that can range from a few days to decades. Now, the thing about long-term memories is they're vital. If we want to remember anything, we have to have it somehow move from our short-term memory to our long-term memory. And then we hope we're able to access it again. All long-term memories aren't the same. There is explicit versus implicit types of memory. Explicit is the stuff you really have to work to remember, like when you have to study for a test, stuff that just doesn't want to stay. Then there's implicit memory, stuff that sticks into your head and you have no real idea why. I can still play heavy metal songs from the 1980s that I haven't heard since the 1980s. I don't know why this is. I'm really good at song lyrics. Strangely enough, I've known singers who really were horrible at song lyrics. I don't have to work all that hard to remember them. When I had to take math classes, I was good at math, but I really had to struggle to keep that information in my head. There are other ways of breaking down memory. There's semantic memory versus episodic memory. Episodic is remembering specific things that happen to you, where semantic memory is the type of memory which, if you're good at trivia, if you know obscure stuff, that's semantic memory. And I'm great at trivia. I know all kinds of silly things, mostly random, that tend to stick in my head. I have a good basis of general knowledge. Episodic memory is remembering an event that happened to you. Here's the thing. Episodic memory, we can be at the same event, and my impression of it is going to be different than your impression of it. Episodic memory is unique to you. Think about the first movie you ever saw. Think about your first day in high school. Think about any of these kind of things. You can probably recall your first day of high school fairly well. Episodic memory, but no one else in high school will have that. Now, episodic memory relies on semantic memory for a large degree. People tend not to remember episodes that are from like 3.5 on. My daughter is 9. She can remember back to when she was 3. She can't remember any earlier than that. The earliest I can remember when I was like 3.5, I remember one random incident. We were alive, we were around, and we were even conscious to a large degree at that time. But that doesn't mean we remember any of it. Our brain just didn't start taking these things in. Once you hit about 60, your episodic memory skills start to decline. It's gonna happen. I like to tell people that, and I think it's true, that having a dissertation, writing a dissertation, doing doctoral work, did more to kill my memory than anything else, because there's just so much stuff that is in there that is crowding out other things. There are lots of things you can do to try to remember stuff. One of the ways that you can try to remember stuff is doing it, thinking about it, before you go to bed. Something about sleep, we don't know what, but something about sleep facilitates the retention of memories. If you put yourself in a similar situation to when you did something, you'll have a better chance of remembering it. And there are things that can stop you from remembering things. Life-provoking situations, we tend not to remember those as well. Sleeping fitfully, if you're in a stressful situation, if you have a poor diet, they can impact the way you remember things. If you imbibe in illegal substances or even legal substances, it can really screw with your memory. And if you've ever known anyone who went blackout drunk, when you have a certain amount of alcohol, you can't process memories anymore. You behave like you would have behaved to an extent. You just don't remember it because your brain is so pickled that that part of your brain shuts down. Our memory isn't all that reliable. And the way this has been most clearly demonstrated in the last however many years is that we are increasingly aware that eyewitness testimony in criminal cases is not all that reliable. You think if someone saw it, easy, slam dunk conviction. And to a certain extent that's true, but it doesn't mean that people remember. You can have your memory influenced, whether consciously or unconsciously, by the person who's writing it down. Your mind can play just massive tricks on you. Where we get the best data from this is from the Innocence Project, a group that they have chapters nationwide where they go through people who've been convicted of crimes who claim innocence and are able to test old crimes with DNA evidence and prove what happened. And they have found a lot of people. As of 2018, 358 people had been convicted and sentenced to death since 1989 who had been exonerated by DNA evidence. Out of the 358 people who had been exonerated through DNA evidence, 71% of them were convicted primarily on eyewitness testimony. People saw them. People remembered them. Well, they didn't really remember them. It's just our brain doesn't work all that good. And this misremembering can be because of the questions that were asked, or it can be random, or it can be because of inbound prejudices. Out of those false identifications, the 71% had been convicted through eyewitness misidentification. 41% involved cross-racial misidentification. People who were white, for instance, misremembered an African American doing crime. So, post-racial society? Well, that's another question, but what I particularly enjoyed about the Didion story was her writing down stuff didn't jibe with her own brain, and that's largely because our own brains can't be trusted.
When you write, you get a certain image of the situation. When you try to remember it, you get a certain image of the situation. It's important to remember that those are just images of the situation, and your point of view isn't necessarily the same as anyone else's about it. But the more sides we get, the more we have an opportunity to try to craft a finely woven point of view. I personally like writing down stuff because I don't trust my short-term memory, but at the very least, when you do write down stuff, it is one of the keys to help getting information to move from that short-term memory out of one of those 5 to 9 slots into deeper rotation. Give it a try. See you next video.